Nozipho, Mbanjwa, and I'm coming to you from the city of Durban in South Africa at the South African Tourism Indaba. Now, this is a special CNBC Africa broadcast made possible by South African Tourism. The conversation that we're going to be having today seeks to interrogate the prospects of the tourism sector's contribution to economic growth. And bringing their voices to this conversation is my esteemed panel. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podium the Honourable Minister of Tourism for South Africa, that's Minister Derek Hanekom. Welcome, Minister. And of course, the Chief Executive of South African Tourism, that's Mr. Thulani Nzima, and a lead radio, television and print broadcaster in financial journalism, a man who's become synonymous with having his finger on the pulse of business. That's Bruce Whitfield. Welcome to my panelists. It's really great having you here. So maybe let's start off with a context-setting question, Minister, and if I can come to you first. How would you describe the state of tourism in South Africa, and are there any major trends that you think are worth exploring today?
Yeah, thanks, Nozipho. I mean, it's a difficult one to capture in a few minutes because it's been, in a way, a spectacular success story. So if we just look at our tourism sector, over the last 2 decades, it's really outstripped growth in all other sectors. In fact, the growth in tourism has outstripped the global growth in tourism. 2014 was quite a difficult year for many countries, especially African countries, and notwithstanding the difficulties, tourism grew. Tourist arrivals grew by 6.6% in 2014, and it continues to grow. And I think that's largely the result of the fact that we are simply a very, very attractive destination, and our many stakeholders across the value chain have really responded well to this market opportunity. In terms of our contribution to South Africa's economy, if you take the direct and indirect impacts of tourism in its totality, we're looking at 10% contribution to GDP, which is very significant. Perhaps more importantly, we've got up to 1.4 million, in fact, over 1.4 million people employed in the sector. So it's a growing sector, it's a sector performing particularly well, and the trend over the last 2 decades has been an upward trend.
Well, it certainly sounds like there's a good story to tell from what Minister is saying, but Thulani, let me bring you in here. And the simple question is, are your marketing efforts paying off? And in particular, what about the future earnings potential of the sector? Where do we see that going?
We certainly feel that our marketing efforts are paying off. The various markets where we are marketing are resonating very well with the messages that we are communicating there. What is very important for us is, in fact, to position the country properly. We have been very successful as a safari destination, and a lot of people know us as such. But we are beginning to have a different narrative about South Africa in terms of its value proposition to a tourist out there. This country has got a lot to do with the heritage and culture, beauty of its nature, as well as lifestyle, music, very, very important. But the one thing that really makes us stand out there with a sustainable advantage is the warmth of our people. Everything else that we do in this country will come to nothing if the South African people themselves were not welcoming to our guests out there. It is not necessarily the pictures that people have with various scenic beauty, animals and stuff like that. It is the interaction they've had with the people that they will remember when they go back into their countries. And for us, that is very, very important. But also the value for money positioning of the country.
Right.
We're not talking about a cheap destination, but we're talking about a destination that has a variety of tourist experiences suited for various budget requirements out there. The fact that at some stage the currency will be weaker than foreign currency is not what we're marketing, because that's a short-term gain.
So, Bruce, what we're hearing is we're going beyond safari. We've got value for money. We're seeing positive growth. Let's bring the voice of business in this conversation. How would you describe the sentiment of the sector, and whether there is an understanding here that this is an exciting sector to be in where you can actually realize good earnings?
I think there's an interesting contradiction between the sentiment that one gets from many people in the tourism sector and what the research is saying. World Economic Forum just this week came out with their international competitiveness research. It comes out every year. And in 2010, the year of the World Cup, and I was deeply cynical about the massive investment that was made in World Cup stadiums, for example, and whether or not there would ever be a return on investment there. But the numbers seem to suggest that 2010 is paying off and paying off quite handsomely. In 2010, in terms of the competitiveness index by the World Economic Forum, we were in position number 66. By 2013, we were in position number 64. We'd made very little progress. And this week, we saw the index come out, and we've moved up to position number 48. Now, other countries have moved up faster than us. China's tourism sector is growing really quickly. Mexico is doing incredibly well. But there's something happening within South Africa's tourism sector that perhaps participants in the sector are not necessarily feeling. We're being perceived as a very positive destination. Just a couple of the factors where we do really well. Great natural resources, says the World Economic Forum. Good infrastructure, good airlines, good links, good tourism links. And the other one that's really important, and it's one that Thulani alluded to, is we're not bad on pricing, which is surprising. For those of us who travel internally in South Africa, we might find it quite steep, but that's until you travel elsewhere. So we're competitive in terms of the value proposition. We don't do so well on issues when it comes to safety and security. We're in the bottom third worldwide of tourism destinations. That's a big issue. Health and hygiene, we do badly. Not a great labor market in South Africa. And of course, the one where we score worst is about international openness. And this has got to do with visa regulations. And I think one of the issues why sentiment amongst the tourism industry, certainly the operators that you talk to, is negative right now. And that is by South Africa's insistence on pushing forward some quite draconian visa regulations when the rest of the world seems to be bending over backwards to welcome tourists. So that's my concern.
So, Bruce, what you've done is given us quite a nice balance between where we're doing it really well and where we're not doing so well. 48 out of 141 countries, that is quite a context that we need to take into consideration. But what Bruce has also done is brought in some contentious issues. And maybe let's take that segue. And, Minister, let's talk about what came out of your African interministerial session yesterday. You hosted a number of your peers from the continent. And I don't doubt for a second that some of those negativities, whether it be visa regulations or other issues like xenophobia, were top of mind on that agenda.
Yes, well, firstly, it was a really excellent meeting with our African ministers who are here, and it's great that there are 20 African countries here at Indaba, other than South Africa, and I think that's really where we want to go, and we see further growth in that. But the interministerial session was largely positive, and it was really focusing on how we can work together to collectively not only market South Africa as a great destination, but the African continent as a whole, and the unique offerings that the African continent has, and how we can strengthen regional cooperation, how we can improve intra-African travel flows as well. Of the 10 million visitors that we get annually, which, of course, as I said before, shows a consistent pattern of growth. But 7 million of those 10 million visitors come from other African countries. So intra-African travel is terribly important. It's clear, I mean, Bruce is absolutely right. We've got to face some of those challenges head on. And that was recognized by the African ministers. Airlink is very important. And of course, travel facilitation, making it easier in terms of visa requirements while protecting your country's interests. I wouldn't go as far as calling them draconian. I'd say well-intended. Yeah. Because we need to look after national interests, but we also need, as the President said during his State of the Nation address, find the appropriate balance between tourism growth, facilitating ease of travel, and protecting our country's security interests.
Now, I happened to sit in that session, and Thulani, I want us to extend the African conversation, because one of the key themes that seemed to be emanating was collaboration over competition. When you're marketing the country, are you also marketing the continent, and do those two worlds converge?
We have realized that for us to succeed as South Africa, we first need to acknowledge the fact that we are part of the African continent. And any negativity, whether it's an Afro-pessimism, will invariably affect the way that we're positioning ourselves. So for us to do very well, we therefore want to make sure that we don't just succeed alone. We don't want to be a little pimple in the face of Africa as the only country that is working well. Our challenge really is to make sure that we can upskill the rest of Africa where it is possible to share resources, to share skills. Knowledge is not expensive. We can share that. Capacity building is also very, very important. But we are responding as well to the global trends out there. Buyers are looking for continental products before they start looking at country products and before they go into the provinces and the cities where we are now. So if you don't acknowledge that and provide a one-stop shop, then you will be found wanting in the modern marketing space. It is also the reason why we have responded correctly in terms of the positioning of Indaba and make it a pan-African trade show. We are providing that which the buyers are looking for, but at the same time, making sure that the exhibitors as well have got this one huge church where they can come and trade their wares. It is also very important for us to understand that in some instances, if you do not package yourself very well as part of the continent, you may as well lose that particular customer. There are people who will be wanting to book South Africa, Kruger National Park, Sun City, Robben Island, Table Mountain, and Vic Falls. And if they cannot get Vic Falls, they may just look elsewhere.
And cancel the entire trip.
So it's very, very important for us. But also what is even important is the fact that you have to move to a level where you can provide a seamless kind of service. The Univisa component that the minister was talking about is very important, because for people to move with ease, it must be such that from an air connectivity point of view and the visa facilitation is not just expensive, but it is ease of travel for them.
Let's latch onto the Univisa, Bruce. So there's been a piloted Univisa between Zambia and Zimbabwe. The Minister of Zambia yesterday was saying it's been an incredible success. They're expanding it to at least 3 other African countries within the next year. Could we potentially see the first real integration of tourism in the region? Because we've been talking since the 1960s of the African Union and regional integration. This seems to be a breakthrough in my view.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk to a South African chief executive of a large retail group called ShopRite, a man called Whitey Basson, who will tell you that it's easier for him to get a visa to go and talk to people in New York than it is to get a visa to go to Angola, for example. We don't do ourselves any favors as a region in terms of making it very difficult to get around. So if you imagine being able to package a holiday destination where you go and you go along to the Kavango River, for example, you go to Caprivi Strip, from there you go to Kariba and you go to Vic Falls, and whichever way you do it, you get a regional tourism experience at the best of what Southern Africa has got to offer. It would be a remarkable breakthrough. But I think as South Africa, we're still struggling with the visa issue.
Yeah.
We talk about foreign tourists, 10 million people, 70% of these people coming from other African countries. Perhaps we need to define tourism in a slightly different way. One looks at the 10 million people. The average spend, according to the World Economic Forum, per tourist in South Africa is something like $978.63. I may have it slightly wrong.
How does that compare in a global context?
It's very low because we dilute the rich tourists coming to South Africa who will participate in those remarkable experiences. We're not talking about people who come into Musina, for example, to do some shopping, or come to Joburg to go to Sandton City to buy some Louis Vuitton. We're talking about people who are coming to spend 2 or 3 weeks. You want the tour groups, you want different demographics of individuals from all around the world coming and having fun adventure youth holidays. One of the greatest growth areas in tourism is Chinese middle-class tourism. Lots of wealthy older Westerners, for example, and then, I don't know how to put it politely, but the Kim Kardashian generation, the millennials who have got money and they're willing to spend it. Now, how do we market to different segments a regional experience that is out of this world?
I'm going to come back to you, Thulani, and ask how you're marketing to Kim Kardashian and her demographic, so that
we don't mind.
I think she's been here, Bruce. You need to get with the times.
I need to keep up.
So let's take a step back, because I think what you're raising, Bruce, also connects with the infrastructure conversation. Minister, to what extent is there real collaboration between the government departments when it comes to aligning your own tourism growth targets with other departments, and in particular with infrastructure investment, to make sure that that keeps pace with the targets that you're chasing?
Yeah, well, it's a challenge that every country faces, is to strengthen that collaboration between departments. But we work well, we work cohesively. I think on the infrastructure side, it is one of our challenges. A lot of the responsibility resides with our provincial governments. And so we've got these wonderful destinations like the Wild Coast, for example, in the Eastern Cape. The road access to some of our destinations needs attention. So we're in constant dialogue with our partners in government, outside of government, to strengthen that collaboration. But in general, we can say that, as was indicated by the World Economic Forum, our infrastructure, we score very highly on our infrastructure. That's both airport infrastructure, road infrastructure generally, rail infrastructure. We've got Rovos rails here, we've got Blue Train here. Some of the most luxurious train holidays in the world are found in South Africa. We can only do it if we have the infrastructure.
So while you percolate on Kim Kardashian, let me go back to Bruce because he's raising a hand. Bruce, a very quick one from
But
you.
imagine being able to open up the wild coast and make it more accessible. I mean, it is one of the most remarkable natural wonders that we have in South Africa that once you're there is fantastic. But boy, it's exciting getting there. Yeah.
One of the interesting things that I noticed coming down to Durban was the buzz and excitement of activity at Oliver Tambo Airport, at King Shaka, but the low-cost carriers that seem to have a presence at these various airports. Let's talk about the aviation industry and whether you think the developments that we're seeing in terms of the entry of LCCs is encouraging and it's really allowing you to take off, if I may.
Well, let me start with the Kim Kardashian. I think what is very important is to understand how we market in various markets. We don't have a one-size-fits-all. We do a lot of research. We are not anecdotal at all with our research information. So once we've done that, we go into consumer insights. It helps us to understand what the Angolans are looking for when they come to South Africa, what the Nigerians are looking for when they come to South Africa, and what the Chinese could be looking for as different to the Americans. That helps us to feed that information into the products in South Africa so that we can have proper tailor-made products developed to respond to those markets. In some of these markets that I'm talking about, you'll find that we are not yet well geared for it. For instance, some markets are cash markets. They don't have credit cards, and when they arrive in your country, you don't quite respond properly, bringing their foreign currencies. So that's the one thing that we do. So yes, there are markets where we will go in there and tell them about Sentin and the shopping experiences that are equal to going to Paris. So don't go to Paris, come to South Africa, we can take care of you, Kim Kardashian. But the other thing that we do, just in response to the low-cost carriers, they play a very, very important link in terms of the distribution of tourism within the geographies of South Africa. Your scheduled and legacy airlines are not able to operate to certain markets. One may be a factor informed by the gauge, the size of the aircraft that they're operating. The other one may just be the fact that it's a very thin market. So you need a kind of airline that is going to operate there, creating a niche of its own, not cannibalizing on what already exists now, but that will go into your feeder routes, your small towns and cities of South Africa. So for us here, the distribution of tourism is a very, very important component. We know that Cape Town and Durban and Johannesburg, all the big metropolitan cities are well marketed, but we're worried about how we can make sure that the benefits of tourism will transcend through to the corners of South Africa. So using the low-cost airlines is very, very important. In fact, in most markets, if they don't use charter services, they will use low-cost airlines to get into those markets. Because at times, the airfare that you pay in a low-cost airline is equal to buying a pair of your designer jeans. So you will afford to do that all the time. So they do play a very, very critical role for us.
It certainly seems that we've kept the conversation very global. I want us to begin to look at the domestic tourists in our country. And let's start with the Minister. We know that there have been quite heavy marketing efforts in terms of getting South Africans to enjoy their country. But a very interesting comment that was made by the Deputy Minister of Tourism from Namibia yesterday saying, you can't love a country that you don't know. And how does this translate to the trends we're seeing in domestic tourism in South Africa? Are South Africans excited about this country and wanting to see each corner of the country?
Well, of course, many South Africans are excited about the country and they do travel a lot, but it is one of our challenges is to get more people to travel and to feel and to appreciate the benefits of travel. So when it comes to domestic tourism, which is frightfully important, not only about getting to know your country, but the seasonality. From certain big source markets, they come certain times of the year. And so you want a more even spread in tourism in your country. There could be factors that are out of your control that would affect some of your source markets. And the operators in your country can always then fall back on domestic tourism, if you like. So the flow of people, often it's linked to sporting events, cultural events, festivals, etc. That helps facilitate that. But I have to say, quite honestly, we need to put more effort into it. You need to help us put effort into it, encourage South Africans to travel, because it's spiritual growth. It connects people to each other. We get to understand each other better as a nation. We get to appreciate our nation better. So it requires a kind of a collective effort from every one of us to put in that encouragement to people to travel. And at the same time, it does require of us to offer more affordable options to people who are traveling domestically.
How do we grow the market share of domestic travelers, Thulani?
Well, the first thing that I want to also elaborate on is just the science of domestic tourism. A lot of countries that are very successful in terms of their tourism have a huge reliance on their own domestic travelers. What we need to do in our country is really to inculcate a culture of tourism, to show people the benefits of tourism. So our mandate really sits on two key pillars. One is, first, educate people, inculcate that culture of tourism and demonstrating the benefits, whilst at the same time you tackle the second part of it, which is conversion. Now, during the tough economic times, we realize that dependency on your long-haul tourism can be very risky to your tourism market. You get easily exposed because the switching ability of tourists is very quick, and they can just quickly strangle your market like that. So we have already made some serious efforts, and our government has seen the benefits of domestic tourism. They have given us additional funding that we are talking to. For the next 3 years, there will be a very huge emphasis on the promotion of domestic tourism. But we need, as Minister has indicated, all hands on deck. We need the private sector to come on board. The affordability of domestic tourism depends a lot more on the private sector in terms of pricing. For our part, we'll make sure that we have proper insights and can educate the domestic market in terms of what it is that they need to do to stimulate and get proper responses from the domestic traveler.
You raised an important point, yes.
Just a little one on that. It's not only about affordability of accommodation, you know, and affordability of restaurants, which all form part of the tourism package, if you like. But I think one of our big challenges is affordability of our key destinations, our World Heritage sites, our national parks, our botanical gardens, etc. Most of them offer special packages, but we do want every South African at some point in their lives, if they want to go to Robben Island, make it possible for people to go to Robben Island. Yeah.
Bruce, I want you to pick up on both of the insights that have been shared with regards to the domestic tourism agenda as a consumer. And let's compare local domestic tourism rates with other countries. Does it add up?
And I mean, look, we are, as a destination, there are many countries that have a two-tier system. Of local tourism versus foreign tourists. Whether it would work in South Africa, I don't know. Do we need to be more competitive, or do we need to get different kinds of tourism products in South Africa? Encourage investment, for example, in holiday destinations. I mean, I can't think of the big foreign ones, for example, but Center Parks is a Dutch concept, for example, which is big in Europe and is big in the United Kingdom, where families go on holidays to beautiful parts of the world. So you could have Center Parks in Knysna. Maybe we could use Sand Parks facilities, upgrade those a little bit to make them more attractive as family destination points. Promote Sand Parks properties. They're in some of the most remarkable, beautiful parts of the world. Tsitsikamma, for example, is one of the most glorious places in the world. Really use the national parks more effectively as places for South Africans to go and enjoy South African hospitality and South African beauty. We have got great opportunities. Two-tier systems probably won't work in South Africa, but we've got great assets. They need investment, though.
So work
do
in
public-private partnerships, perhaps.
It certainly sounds like work in progress. PPPs as another option. Let's get into another issue before we go to break, and that's very quickly the space and scope, Thulani, for small and medium-sized enterprises. I think we always run the risk of having such conversations with only a big business outlook. How can you describe the visibility that small and medium-sized enterprises are getting from a supporting agency like yourself?
We're very, very clear about that. And just to give you an example, where we are now at Indaba 2015, we have a special speed marketing session that some of you will already have gone through that. It is designed specifically to facilitate the SMMEs in terms of having FaceTime with the buyers. Most of the time when you bring SMMEs here, they're not Indaba ready. So this time we've made sure that they are ready for Indaba. They have the ability to engage constructively with the buyers so that they can get value. By the time they get back home, they have already signed up some business. But it is always a very conscious effort. We have been promoting emerging businesses. We currently have the Lilizela National Tourism Awards. One of the key elements of the Lilizela Tourism Awards is to reward the emerging entrepreneur of the year. We don't just do that. In the past years, we've always made sure that the one entrepreneur that has been emerging gets support from us, real business. When we have events such as this, we have always given them an opportunity to make money, support them from a skills and training point of view. But we also want to make sure that those kind of people don't disappear 1 year. There are various efforts that are actually being made out there to make sure that there is a clear focus on the SMMEs. So for us, it's not just an incidental thing that we're doing just because we're coming to Indaba now. It's a very, very clear, conscious effort that we're making. But just to
yes.
end off with the point that Bruce was making, if you're going to look for a change in your domestic tourism, the emerging business enterprises are the ones that are going to bring new businesses.
Those are the ones who are going to be the drivers of that change. Bruce, let me bring you quickly in for a quick comment there.
It's very hard for anybody who's running a small business, whether a small lodge or whatever the place might be, to compete with the big brands. If you are traveling anywhere in the world and you don't know the destination, if you're going to, I don't know, Somalia, for example, or you're going to Ethiopia, you're going to look for big brands, perhaps, as a traveler to those places. Is there a Hilton? What else is there that I recognize? International people look at it like that. Tourism sort of management systems. Ireland has got a very good system whereby good quality grading, reliable grading, for example. So depending on your budget, if there's a decent grading council within a country, you look at the 1-star, the 2-star segment, you get a good idea of what to expect. Maybe tourism grading needs to be looked at more carefully. Destination management systems, so that when you go into the purchase decision, you can be a little bit more adventurous. Nothing wrong with the Hilton, but you can be a bit more adventurous and go, let me go to a boutique hotel or to a private B&B or whatever the case is, because this destination management system has vetted it for me. So that would be a nice place for South Africa to go.
Well, on that note of how do we give small and medium-sized enterprises a better fighting chance for market share, let's take a short break. When we come back, we continue our conversation here at the ICC in Durban at the South African Tourism Indaba. Thank you for staying with us and welcome back to the South African Tourism Indaba. Now, before we went to break, we were on the point of small and medium-sized enterprises and whether or not they're getting the support that they need to take the fight to the big players. Now, I'm going to pick up on that point before we get into our live audience Q&A session, where our audience is going to get an opportunity to engage with our panelists. Thulani, let me come back to you on that point. I know that you wanted to make a comment on the note. Let's get that comment in.
I just wanted to make a very quick point, indicating that indeed it is very true that the success of the SMMEs relies on our ability to link them with big businesses. And it is that kind of relationship that at the moment does exist. We have been working very closely with SATSA and working very closely with TAP, one of the NGOs in this country that are helping us, but also the link between ourselves and the Grading Council. Under South African Tourism, one of the business units that we have is the Grading Council of South Africa. We have already used that muscle to make sure that we tap into the SMME components. If you look at the number of establishments that we are grading there, from the B&Bs to your 5-star components. But within that, we are always very, very conscious of the fact that the SMME component has got to be taken care of.
Well, we're going to find out if that strategy is working, because we do have small and medium-sized enterprises in our audience, and we have big business also sitting here in our audience. Now, please do indicate if you'd like to ask a question. Please identify yourself and to whom you'd like to ask your question. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you so much. My name is Farai Gundan. I'm coming from New York City. And Bruce, I was named in 2015 a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. My question actually is for the Minister, the Honorable Minister. 10% of GDP is actually pretty impressive. I'm wondering how is that broken out in terms of international, inter-Africa travel or domestic? And where do you see the areas of greatest opportunity and challenge? And what is the strategy that would drive that? And then to the CEO, Mr. Nzima, my question to you is, you mentioned, you talked about countries having success in domestic travel. I'm wondering what are those African countries that have had success in domestic travel, and what are the lessons learned and best practices that you as South Africa are incorporating? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that question. Let's move on to our second question. We'll take another question right here in the front. Yes, please, sir.
Helmo Price from the BRICS Post. Minister and the CEO from tourism, what are you doing to address the decline in the numbers that come to tourism in Indaba itself? The only segment that actually is rising is the media. All the other ones seem to be declining and have been declining for a number of years already.
Elmo, thank you for that question. I think we'll take it to Thulani. Let's get our third question. Yes, please, sir.
Owen Corrie from Travel Extra in Ireland. And a question for the Minister. The European experience has been that what unlocks large tourism numbers is not marketing but air access. Africa would be perceived from where we're looking as being some of the most regulated skies in the world. And traditionally we would have seen the South African government as being more interested in preserving South African Airways than opening up large tourism access to other airlines. There has been a perceivable change in that, but I'd be interested in your comments. Do you see yourselves as champion of open skies and the European model or the transatlantic model, or what would you like to see happening, unraveling in the question of regulated skies over Africa? What would be your ideal scenario?
Thank you so much. I think let's take a couple of those questions, and maybe let's start off with the open sky policy and whether this is something that is on the radar for a country like South Africa.
Well, thanks, Nozipho. In reality, open skies has been in practical effect in South Africa. It's becoming more and more competitive. Just one example, flights to the United Arab Emirates. We now have 70 direct flights per week, and that has grown considerably over the last couple of years. We have more affordable airlines. It's become a more competitive market. Even if while we are looking at some of the challenges of SAA, we in fact have discontinued some unprofitable routes. For us, the challenge is not to just promote our national carrier. The challenge for us is to promote travel to South Africa and from South Africa to various destinations. So we're not obsessed with our national carrier. The national carrier performs a very important role, and it might in fact address some of the market gaps, because that is what you can do with a national carrier. But our big challenge, and we are consistent in that, is to say let's improve access to South Africa, make it easier for people to come here. It featured very prominently in our discussion with the African ministers, because there lies some of the problems. Even some of the African ministers who are here today had to travel to Europe, to fly from Europe to South Africa, because there is no direct link. Sometimes the grand irony exists that a neighboring country to an African country, the only way to get there by air is to fly to Europe and then to the neighboring country. So the African ministers are certainly aware of it, but there's a long way to go to improve this kind of air link. So that was on that question. We'll get to the other ones later?
Yeah, absolutely, okay. Minister. I want to get on to a question that was posed to the Minister and the CEO, but I think the CEO can take this question. And this was a decline in the attendance of tourism in Indaba and the reasons behind that.
Well, there were two questions. The other one was about domestic tourism, which African countries are showing success. Let me talk first about international countries that have shown success. The US is one of them. You have a large population of Americans traveling within America. In fact, about only 58% of Americans will travel as far as Mexico, and they feel comfortable with that. The large component of it is domestic. India is another such example of a country where domestic tourism is big. China is yet another one where you're seeing examples of this. I've seen some of the African countries where, whether informed by economic realities or the impediments of airlink, whatever the situation may be. Nigeria is another country that has a lot of domestic focus in terms of traveling. Zimbabwe follows a similar route. On the question of decline in indaba, let's put matters into perspective. First of all, indaba traditionally was 4 days. We are now only operating for 3 days. The importance of the 3 day, 4 days is that on the 4th day, we had an ability to open it for consumers. We are now becoming a very focused trade show, and therefore we do not open up for the consumers as such, although individuals can register and come here. So it's a sizable chunk of numbers. If you're talking 10 style numbers, that would be a sizable chunk of that number going out. But the other thing is that the reality that has happened in the past 2 years is that we have had 2 major competitors entering the market.
Not bad.
Like
Yeah,
any
as you said
other
earlier, Johnny.
entity, when a competitor enters your market, you must factor in the percentage of decline that you are going to have. And what is the realistic number? At the moment, we're talking about a decline that is sitting in the region of about 10%. And we think it's a comfortable number because indaba is now settling in as well. But the other things that we have done, we have deliberately made sure that we bring quality to indaba. You may not have been aware that in the past, the vetting of exhibitors to indaba was a very loose approach. We had people who were coming here to sell camping stuff and things like that that are not actually products and experiences. Where our focus now is very much quality exhibitors who are bringing specific experiences here, but also including the vetting process of our buyers. We want to bring buyers who are committed to selling the continent of Africa, buyers who have shown serious interest in coming here, buyers that are relevant to the exhibitors in this country. So there's a very deliberate effort in the manner in which we are vetting our buyers here.
Small addition. I think it's a very important question because we're right here at Indaba. And I think it's about the quality of Indaba. It's not purely about numbers, but numbers are very important as well. At the end of the day, it's about the numbers of business deals struck and the extent to which you're bringing the right exhibitors here and the right buyers here. But just, so the decline is a very slight decline. So it's not something to be alarmed about. But I think the addition that I want to make, Nozipho, is that, you know, we obviously really looking at it. It is the premium travel show in Africa. And we want to build on that. We want to build on the brand. So I will be even announcing later on today that we are relooking at the model and that we will be issuing tenders later this year to bring in a partner to Indaba. And so we think Indaba can be considerably strengthened, and we will do so, and we have sort of plans in place in order to do so.
I think most of the questions have been answered with the exception of the 10% breakdown. I'm going to park that because I do think it's an important question, but one that we can wrap up with as we look at the broad challenges and opportunities, which I think that's where your question is going. Let's get your quick comment into line, and then let's go back to the floor and get in more questions.
I just didn't want to lose the point on quality of indaba. And then what demonstrates quality of indaba is that we are moving away from just building the marquees, the stand, to focusing on selling meetings. It is meeting times that are very, very important to keep your buyers and exhibitors very busy with constructive meetings. Just for this indaba alone, at this stage, we have over 10,000 meetings confirmed. And for us, we believe that's quality. That's why people come here. And you can extrapolate in terms of what is the value of the business that we are writing up here. By the end of Indaba, on Monday, we're going to give you some heads up in terms of numbers at that stage. The number definitely would have increased in terms of the number of meetings we have had. And for us, that is the focus. And then we can use the direct and indirect contribution, both in terms of the business written here, as well as a contribution to the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and Durban in particular.
So we'll be looking out for that press release and maybe doing a thing or two about it. Let's take another round of questions. I'll start off with the gentleman and then we'll move across. Yes, please, sir.
Helge Bendel from South Africa Magazine from Berlin. Minister, you just said you want to make it much easier for people to come to South Africa. That's also what the United Nations World Tourism Organization says, you know, openness of South Africa. To us, it seems that the new regulations for visa that you're going to implementing in like 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, will make it much more difficult, especially for families to come. And I was wondering, so what's your take on this one? And the second question would be, the Minister of Home Affairs said they will communicate clearly and properly with all the travel agents to tell them how these rules are going to be implemented. I'm wondering when this is going to be start and whether Indaba wouldn't be the right place and time to do that for regulations that start in 3 weeks.
Thank you so very much. Let's take a second question. There's a question on the other side of the room. Thank you so much. And that question that we've just fielded, visa regulations and, of course, home affairs communication to industry players. Yes, please, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Fiso Mtembu from MCP Media. My question is directed to Bruce. Bruce, I'd like to get your views on the pace of transformation, empowerment, maybe aka as broad-based black economic empowerment in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Sfiso, for that question. Do we have a third question just behind you in the second row? Yes, please, sir.
My name is Samuel Bwadi. I write for Daily Guide, Ghana. I want to find out how much government has sunk into the development of the tourism sector since Indaba began, or since it began. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stride. Direct question there. Bruce, let's get you coming in first. I think you've had an easy one on the questions thus far. The pace of transformation, that's what Sfiso wants to know.
It's really interesting, isn't it, Sfiso? Because you walk around in Indaba, and it is not the most transformed environment in the world. And it is striking that is the case, that the assets are largely owned by white-owned companies, that South African tourism, especially high-end tourism, is dominated by people who have had access to capital over the last 20 years, and that transformation hasn't happened. There's been interesting developments. For example, the Mala Mala land claims has been absolutely crucial, but last week's Sunday Times tells us that there's been something of a bottleneck in terms of the empowerment of the community that owns the land upon which some of these private reserves operate, and we don't know what that bottleneck is causing. So there are some very significant issues in empowerment, but it comes also from a lack of funding. It comes from a lack of access to money. The banking sector, I'm absolutely certain, could be a little bit more generous. We could use the Industrial Development Corporation, perhaps, as a more active source of funding, the Development Bank as a more active source of funding when it comes to tourism investment. Tourism at the lowest levels is quite a low barrier to entry sort of profession. You can get yourself a minibus, get yourself registered, and you can become a tour operator on a very small scale, but you're not going to grow a business of scale easily from that basis. There's some amazing people doing township tours. There are amazing people doing stuff on the fringe of tourism, but it's not mainstream.
So let's take the question on how much the government has invested in the sector raised by Samuel, but perhaps, Minister, what we can also comment on is what Bruce is raising now, and that is the role that development finance institutions can play in bolstering that national purse investment into the sector.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the investment into the sector from government for the moment. Just the National Department of Tourism, for this financial year, there's a budget of 1.6 billion rand, which is not insignificant. A lot of it goes to the marketing efforts. But of course, each of the provinces have their own budgets for tourism, and many cities have budgets for tourism as well. So a considerable amount of money is going into the development of tourism. Arguably, it could be more because the returns are very high. And I think there's a very good case economic case for investing in tourism. On the sort of transformation side, when we talk about growth in tourism, we like to include the word inclusive growth. So it's not just about boasting about growth figures, but to what extent do the majority of South Africans benefit from that growth in tourism? One of it would be a simple benefit in job creation. For a person who is unemployed, if tourism can create a job, very important. But the other one would be the face of the industry and the ownership face of the industry, if you like. It's not that it hasn't been changing, it has. But the change is not at the pace we would like to see it. We take that very seriously. What kind of measures do we have in place in order to facilitate that and encourage that transformation? Well, firstly, support to SMMEs, because many of them are there, but they're not necessarily as competitive as they could be. Many of them could grow, but the growth would be dependent not just on financing models through our development financing institutions, but business support provided to those enterprises. And so we have a good government program, but we should expand it. We recently, Nozipho, announced something called a Tourism Incentive Program.
Right.
And I could go into some of the details, but very exciting things happening in terms of the Tourism Incentive Program, but one of which would be to allow and to facilitate and to fund greater market access for small and medium enterprises. And clearly we would give priority to black-owned enterprises to make sure that they can also market their product. But these things go hand in hand. improve the destination, improve the product, help them improve their product to run their businesses better, invest in skills development and training, and then assist in marketing the product.
Minister, I know that you're going to move on to the visa question, and I'll ask us just to park it for a second, because I want us to come full circle in this conversation. And Thulani, I would like you to also comment on the visa regulations. Bruce, let's get your quick comment coming back to the minister so we can wrap this part.
It's about growing the industry. It's about getting the volumes of people to South Africa that will contribute so hugely to the natural expansion of an industry. At the moment, the numbers of big spending tourists aren't growing fast enough, and that's my concern there.
Let's move on to visa regulations and concerns. Let me first get Thulani's view in here, because there's been a lot of publicity and headlines that suggest that this is going to be a real knock to the marketing efforts that you might have put out when these regulations come into play.
I think that's a bit of an elephant. Let the minister take that first, and then I'll come in where there's a gap.
Thulani just happens to know that I love elephants. And we have lots of them in South Africa. Let me just say we can pride ourselves on our conservation efforts, and that's good.
Great.
But on the visa issue, to get back to the very important question, we are worried. And so we are in dialogue with our sister department, the Department of Home Affairs, and there are other departments affected as well. Two things. One is the requirement of what is called an unabridged birth certificate, which would apply to all countries in the world. We want to contribute towards the global effort to combat human trafficking and child trafficking in particular, but we need to do it in such a way that it doesn't have unintended negative impacts on our tourism flow, if you like. And so that's the one. And then the other one is in-person applications for visas. Again, we're having that discussion with the Department of Home Affairs, recognizing the need to tighten up our security and to be very security conscious. We think that there are better ways of doing it, so that whatever we do in order to secure our country's security interests, that we don't do it in such a way that it has a negative impact on tourism. But I don't have any grand announcement to make, other than to say that we are worried about the current situation, and we are in clear discussion to find a way out of it.
Are you going to attempt to add to the minister's analysis?
Now I can comment. And my comment is a bit generic. In fact, the approach that we take as South African tourism is that we look at the value chain. And the value chain for us is simply described as all the key stakeholders that have a role in the delivery of a tourist experience. And that starts with ourselves, marketing the destination as a preferred leisure and business events destination, and then moving on to making sure that those that are aware of the country will be aware on a positive note. That's how we can then work with the chain to do conversion. But the bottom line is that in the value chain approach, among other key stakeholders will be the visa facilitation process. And when you talk about this, you talk about affordability, we talk about logistics, how many issuance points are there in a country, and the number of staff members that they've got, the turnaround times, because people haven't got 30 days to wait for a visa. They will go elsewhere, and then go to the immigration officers. For us, everybody else, including issues of safety and security as perceptions. So we deal with everybody in that value chain who either can negatively impact on our delivery or can enhance the way in which we are delivering. So Home Affairs, immigration officers, and key stakeholders in terms of the provision of hotels, transport logistics, and airlines are very, very key for us.
A key stakeholder in your value chain. I'm going to allow a final round of questions because we are running out of time. So we'll take the lady at the back, the gentleman in the second row who's had his hand up for quite a while, and we'll take just one more. Please identify yourself, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Shrabanti from the Times of India. My question is about, we've been all hearing about the recent attacks in Durban, the riots, the xenophobic attacks. How has that affected Indaba? I mean, have you seen a fall in numbers? Have you seen any, we've heard that a few countries have dropped out. How are you, sort of countering that? And how do you make sure that this does not have a negative impact?
Thank you so very much for that question. Let's take the gentleman in the second row. Thank you very much, sir. Please go ahead.
For the opportunity, greetings to my panel. My name is Sibo Seso from Dimension Media, and my question is directed to the Minister of Tourism. What are the plans or programs does your ministry have in order to educate the South African citizen to be the ambassadors of tourism in all spheres of their lives in order to maximize our economy boost? Thank you.
Sbusiso, thank you for that question. And that final quick question, sir, I've got less than 2 minutes, so please be very concise with your question.
Okay. I just want to know from Mr. Nzima, how does it compare the last two indabas to what is coming up now?
Thank you very much.
In terms of figures.
In terms of figures, I think we've spoken about the indaba figures, but let's take on the xenophobic question and, of course, the educating the consumer, the domestic consumer, as a response.
Firstly, indaba is on a different scale. And when you look at it compared to other trade shows in the world, they will be different. If you look at WTM, the numbers are a little bit too high. IMEX and ITB, those are very, very different numbers. But in terms of where we're positioning ourselves, we think that we are settling in terms of where we want to be with indaba. And the numbers that we are having at the moment, we are very comfortable. Whether you're talking from exhibitors to buyers to media presence here, the fact that media interest is increasing is good news for us. It says we have something to give to you and your audiences and your readers out there. Domestic tourism, I think I've already indicated that if you want to be successful and creating a safety net in situations where the economic conditions change dramatically, you must benefit. But you need to have a culture of tourism within your people. You can't latch into conversion before people are converted in terms of their mindsets.
Minister, we are wrapping up the show, and I would like to get your final comment. And the comment really is to get to understand and hear you articulate what your vision is for South African tourism.
Well, it's difficult for me not to just very briefly comment on the question about the attacks on foreign nationals. I mean, it happened. It was very unfortunate. We have a reality that we have a couple of million people here who are not South African born living in South Africa. Many are here with work permits and contributing well to our economy. But we have large numbers of people who enjoy human rights in our country, and so it should be. And that we can be proud of, because that's not necessarily the case in every country. What we saw a few weeks ago, unfortunate, because we do have poverty, we do have unemployment, and there was a flare-up. The good news, though, is that there was a very rapid response to it. It's not the sentiment, and South Africans came out in their hundreds of thousands to say that's not us. They don't speak for us. And so I think that was also observed internationally. And so we stick with that. We are part of Africa, and that we welcome Africans to South Africa. And so let us be very clear. Our message is a no to xenophobia message. On the vision, if you like, well, you know, we've got a very, very solid base that we work on. We want to continue growing the tourism sector, but ensure that it grows in such a way that, as we said earlier on, that it's inclusive growth, that new opportunities are created for new entrants into the sector, that skills development takes place, and that also that we have responsible tourism. Because a lot of the tourism that comes to South Africa is about our natural assets. Of course, it's also about culture and heritage, etc. But we've got this incredible scenic beauty, beautiful beaches, wildlife, and we need to conserve these assets. So whatever tourism growth happens, it has to be environmentally and socially responsible, and that's our vision. To grow our tourism sector, to continue the growth, but in such a way that it benefits as many South Africans as possible.
Well, on that note of balancing tourism growth and balancing it in a way that is sustainable and is protective of the environment, we do close this special CNBC Africa broadcast of the South African Tourism Indaba here at the ICC in Durban. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. And don't forget that you can keep this conversation alive on Twitter. The hashtags that we are using is hashtag Indaba 2015 and hashtag Meet South Africa. From myself, Nozipho Mbanjwa, it's goodbye. Thank you very much. Yes, please stay for your photo. One photo? Yes. Photo. Yes. A photo. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jen.